Okay, so for this final talk, Ross and I wanted to really start to have a discussion around some of the other challenges facing our young men at this time. This is a period of forced isolation. Young men doing their bit, I suppose doing a bit for the country, like we all are. But that presents us with other challenges, and a lot of these challenges will probably tie in from some of the stuff that we've talked about before. And I think that's where we want to take this conversation. So, Ross, do you want to start us off with some of your thoughts around this particular area?
Yeah, obviously in this period of isolation, social distancing, I think on the one hand we want to encourage young people to be engaging in social media more, to keep in touch with their friends and to have social contact that way, and that's great. I think it's a real godsend just now. But on the other hand, I think there is all the risks out there as well on social media that we need to be mindful of, and maybe particularly for young men, because all young people have access to smartphones and they're constantly on sites like Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp. And these same sites are also being frequented by drug dealers. And there is a lot of exploitation around, we know that from the research. And basically, it's much easier for young people to get a hold of drugs. And these dealers are kind of posting pictures and videos of Class A drugs quite freely on these same platforms that these young guys are engaging with. And it's so easy for them, because they can contact these dealers through encrypted messaging platforms. They can use emojis to identify which drugs they want to avoid detection, and they don't even have to meet them in real time anymore, because we have this culture of 24-hour deliveries to your front door. So I think there are lots of risks out there in terms of the drug culture that we just need to be mindful of for our young men just now.
Yeah, I think it's almost like phoning for pizza in many ways, Ross, as well. I heard that in the news recently. It can be as easy as phoning Domino's and ordering whatever. And we are seeing some of the fixed penalty tickets that the police in Scotland are issuing to groups of people who are congregating in parks. And who's to say that, our young people are still, you may have had some sort of drug habit in the past, that's just not going to stop because you're in isolation. And I heard down in London that drug prices were increasing. So I think that presents some other challenges as well. I think for me, in the last talk, we, both Ross and I encouraged you as a parent or a teacher to really get young people online, to balance it out with good activity, good physical activity, going out for that one period of exercise that we're allowed each day, or but also getting a good night's sleep is important as well. But I think let's be careful of the other side of social media. And Ross has talked about communication and access to drugs. For me, for boys especially, it's exposure to online content, harmful online content. And in Scotland in the last sort of decade, whilst we've seen big decreases in overall levels of violence, what we are seeing in Scotland is a big increase in levels of sexual violence. And I think it's important that we start to look at the culture around the perpetrator and how that might be, sending out a narrative, sending out a message and communicating a message. And I think the big, for me just now, online pornography is one of the big issues that we need to be really sort of thinking about as teachers, as mothers, as fathers, as anybody who's got an interest in working with boys. I think back in 1997, 6 or 7 years after the World Wide Web came into its own, there were approximately, I think 900 online porn companies making movies. And even back then, there was something I read recently, they were making 13,500 pornographic films. When you compare that to Hollywood, they were making 600 movies in a year. So even back in 1997, massive impact of online pornography. And today, there's just that many online companies and organizations who are making thousands and thousands and thousands of films. So many that you just cannot, it's impossible to actually accurately count what's going on. I think in 2013, one of the big sites, Pornhub, 15 billion views in 1 year, 1.68 million visits every single hour. And recent statistics suggest that 1 in 3 boys have excessive use or use porn excessively. And I think, I'm not going to suggest that porn is the cause of our increases in sexual violence, but pornography is a massive, what I call a sex miseducator. We know in our schools in Scotland and probably across the UK that when we look at sex education in schools, it's mostly on bits and bobs, as I say. It's the biology of sex. I think when you start to look at the bits that's missing from that content, I think our young people, girls and boys, are getting their messages from online pornography. And just now, I don't see a big enough counterbalance. The porn industry is massive. It's going absolutely nowhere in the next few decades. So we need to start thinking about how do we provide that counterbalance. And I think it is affecting our relationships. We know Phil Zimbardo in America, the psychologist, talks about boys flaming out academically in their relationships and sexually. And he, in his book Man Interrupted, he talks about online pornography as a massive driver for behaviour amongst young men. We have young boys looking at girls and women as 2-dimensional objects rather than 3-dimensional objects. We see a lot of young women being asked to perform certain sexual acts very early on in the relationship. So I think, online pornography, it's there. I think that they often say the average age for young boys and just now is about 10. 9 or 10 is their first exposure to online pornography. And you think about the content, back in my day, where there was almost a story around the film. Nowadays, it's about winners and losers, and men win, women lose. It's extremely misogynistic. It's violent. It's aggressive. There was a documentary a few years ago called Sex in Class, which was really, I'm sure you can still get that on the iPlayer. Sex in Class. It was where a sex educationalist from Belgium came across to work in a school in England, and it was scary, funny, worrying. All these things were captured in this film and this program. And what she concluded is, well, what's happening in our classrooms, what's happening in our society is being replicated from porn films. So the expectations being placed on boys, and Ross talked about the impacts of masculinities and how that might, force boys to conform to certain behaviours, but it's impacting on young girls as well. So for me, if I was a parent of a young boy, I've got daughters who are adults now, but for me, I always speak to parents and say, be aware of where your young son or young daughter is going to. We often think of the internet as a thing, and I know I've heard it described. The internet's a place, and if your daughter or son was going to the park, after school, you'd be asking that person, when are you coming back? Who are you going with? But when they go upstairs to the bedroom, you're not asking these questions. And I think one thing I'd like to advise, and just to get young parents and teachers thinking about, is show an interest in their online activity. Talk about these issues, because they are issues. And I think, as well as impacting potentially negatively on relationships, it's impacting negatively on boys' health, physical health. We know that, and you might explain this better than me, Ross, around the parts of the brain which are influenced by addiction issues, and online pornography. The way it's presented in little YouTube clips, it's almost like going into, I heard it described recently, it's just like going into one of these Chinese buffets or going to the cake stall. You're being faced with all these clips or these cakes, and you just want a bit of that. I want a bit of that. I want a bit of that, and that's just releasing, I think it's dopamine levels in your brain, which is impacting. And so there's issues around that. Like, in many ways, the teenage brain is not ready for this overload of dopamine. Is that correct, Ross? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, there are all sorts of, it's a buyer's market, there's all sorts of menus out there for so many things. There's menus of drugs, there's menus of pornography, even like gambling, for instance, as well. During gaming, the young men are constantly bombarded with images of sponsoring, by football companies, 32 Red, Daffabet, William Hill, Ladbrokes, constantly coming up on the screen, and drawing them into the whole area of youth gambling as well. And you know, if they're on Fortnite, for instance, they're expected to have the very best kind of skins and guns, you know, and exchange the best skins. And you know, if they're playing FIFA, you know, it's the best coins and the best players that they're expected to have. So they're drawn into so many different things in and around what they're actually doing at the time online.
I think that's right. It's almost like it's an online marketplace, isn't it? For our virtual pleasure, whether it be gaming, whether it be betting, whether it be using pornography. You know, these are big issues, and I think these organisations, these industries, they know exactly what they're doing. You know, they know exactly how to hook that person in. You know, I heard in France recently that some of these online porn organisations were giving free subscriptions at this time. You know, they knew that boys and men were being isolated in their houses, and they thought, hey, chance to make some money here. You know, in the long term, how do we get them hooked into with sort of free subscriptions just now? So I think we just need to be, as a society, be aware of what's actually going on in this wonderful World Wide Web. And we've talked before about how just now we are seeing some really fantastic usages of media, social media. We're talking today about issues. We're seeing you know, organizations around the world, charities around the world having virtual meetings. We're seeing on Mother's Day, we had, you know, grandchildren and sons and daughters having online meetings with their mums. I'm still trying to get my mum to actually, you know, use Facebook Messenger. I think I'm just about there. But there's some great opportunities and we're seeing that just now. We're not seeing the device. We're not seeing the division that we saw before this crisis. You know, around Brexit and around Scottish independence and other things as well, where we saw just people fighting each other on social media. I think just now we're seeing social media being used in the way that it should be getting used. We talk openly and honestly, and I think because we're realising that we're all in this together now. This current crisis could affect any one of us. You know, I'm sure by the end of this, everybody watching this will be no more than 2 or 3 handshakes away from a family who's been affected by this. And that's sad, but that's the reality that we're seeing just now, is that every day where the death toll is rising, and these numbers are people that people care about. So I think that's the reality that we're seeing just now. So I think just be aware of what young people are doing online. And you know, Ross has pointed out issues around gaming, drugs, gambling. I've talked about pornography, and I'm sure there'll be other challenges out there. Anything else you can think of at this time, Ross?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say was the role modelling, because you know, young people are no longer influenced by their immediate peer networks. They're influenced by people all across the world through social media. You know, and YouTube, for instance, you know, you get all these videos of YouTubers, you know, that are normalizing things like cannabis use and use of drugs and pornography and online betting and all of these things. So the influences go far beyond their immediate peer networks as well.
I think that notion of role models is important, because you know, we're seeing world leaders on stage every single night. You know, in many ways demonstrating some of the traits and attributes that you talked about in the previous talk around masculinities, around living up to that expectation. You know, we saw one world leader, you know, talking, this is nonsense, this won't affect us, this is just the common cold. And we're seeing other leaders who are demonstrating very similar traits as well. So I think, you know, there's a lot of young people out there who lack role models, who lack positive influence in their lives. And I think for boys, that is really important. Boys are vulnerable, as we've talked about in these series of talks. And I think we need not just to, you know, wait on the teachers and the parents being the role models. You know, I think we ourselves need to demonstrate that as well. You know, don't expect the mums or dads to do it. You know, if you're a teacher or an influence in that person's life, you know, as we said before, you know, what you promote, you permit. So I think it's, you know, this is, you know, Ross and I have both talked about a number of other challenges out there for young boys and young men at this current time. I hope you've got something from these series of talks. We've enjoyed speaking to you. There'll probably be many other other subjects we could have talked about. To finish with, Ross, anything you want to leave us with today?
I think, you know, just what you've said, you know, there's lots of really great things happening. Organisations stepping up, making use of social media and online platforms to engage people. And, you know, I think that's great, but it's just being aware of those risks and those dangers and those influences as well, and knowing what your children and our young people are doing and where they are online.
Yeah, I think, you know, just my thoughts are, just to leave you with, you know, I love watching TED Talks, and there's one of my TED Talks I watch every so often. It's by an American philosopher, Derek Darby. It's called Doing the Knowledge. And, you know, I often say to people, one thing that we can all do more of in this world is do the knowledge. You know, we're all learning about COVID-19 just now. We're learning about what's going on. But I think some of the issues that Ross and I have talked about over these series of talks is go out and learn about this stuff. Because when you are more aware of these issues about pornography, about gaming, gambling, about masculinities, about all the issues we've talked about, it makes you better aware and better informed to have a conversation about it, an honest, authentic conversation. And every day is a learning. You know, it's what you learn after you think you know what, all that counts. I think it's important that we just keep our mind completely open to lots of issues. You know, don't shut people down. I think sometimes we're too quick to shut people down who might have a different opinion than us. You know, be open to different understanding, different learning. Don't have to agree with each other at this time, but be open to new learning. And yeah, you might come away with some more information, some more tools that you can pass on to other people in your life. And my learning has been inspired by the likes of Ross and other people who have opened up my learning every single day. People out there have tried to bring me back into my old way of thinking, but you know, with this new knowledge, you can start to influence other people, and particularly young boys and young men, if that's who you're looking after or working with. So thank you to my POV Online for allowing Ross and I to have this conversation, and look forward to getting some responses on this.